I'm incredibly excited to be moderating this panel. I'm both impressed and inspired by this group of women. I love the enthusiasm that they bring to sports marketing, and more specifically, the role that women are playing in it. So to get things started, I think we should all introduce ourselves. So I will throw it to each of you. Introduce yourself, tell us about your background and your current role. Who do I want to pick first? Christy, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody. My name is Christy Hedgpeth. I am the COO of the Wnba. I have been involved in sports both as an athlete and as an executive my entire life. By design, I absolutely love it. I have been, before the NBA, I was in the sports apparel and footwear industry, doing a lot of marketing roles and managing a few business units, and then had the opportunity to join the NBA. And I started out in a group called Wnba, which advises teams on revenue and driving popularity, and then had the real pleasure of coming over to be the COO of the Wnba and to help lead our business transformation.
So thank you for sharing. Lisa? Oh, still on mute.
Good thing I've never done this before. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me join. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm Lisa Woodward with Anheuser-Busch. I've been with AB for just over 5 years. Prior to that, I was on the team side, and I spent about 8 seasons with the St. Louis Rams here in St. Louis, overseeing their marketing group and brand strategy and fan development. And prior to that, I was with my alma mater, University of Illinois, working for the basketball program there. So here at AB, my role really focuses on all of our sponsorship strategy, our contracts, our negotiations. So working with our team in New York, really across the board with all of our partnerships.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Kate.
Yep. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. Kate Johnson, joining you from my Google headquarters in Oakland, California. At Google, I head up our global sports and entertainment marketing partnerships team. So that does include looking across kind of how we're leveraging our media relationships alongside what I call really building a marketing capacity around these more integrated marketing partnerships, enabling our brand to both tell a story while also showcasing our innovation within that partnership itself. My background is that I joined Google at the start of 2020. Right before the pandemic, joining from 7 years spent at Visa, heading up the global sports marketing team there as well. So long history in this space, and very proud of the work that we've done to start things off at Google with the Wnba. So always happy to see a friend in Christy here.
Well, we've got some great background here. I'm sure we'll make a great discussion. But before we get into the meat of it, I will start with softball. Who were your favorite athletes growing up? Kate, since you're off mute, I'm just going to throw it to me.
I'll just start. So this one's an easy one for me, and I feel so blessed because she's become a friend over time. But Julie Foudy definitely was one of my all-time favorites. And I'll just share a quick story. For me, so I grew up as rowing on the Willamette River in Portland, Oregon. I ended up competing, going to the University of Michigan, competing in rowing at U of M, and then graduated and went on to compete for the U.S. national team. Went to the 2004 Olympics, and after our competition, went and watched the U.S. women win gold in soccer at the 2004 Olympics, but then ended up at a Sports Illustrated party with my hero, Julie Foudy, and the rest is history. But it's just one of those moments where I think for me, becoming an Olympian really was that realization of, oh my gosh, now I'm on the same level as some of my heroes growing up as female athletes.
That's a really cool story. Thank you.
Well, I have nothing to follow up with that one. I feel like that's a hard one. So I'm going to jump in because Christy probably has a cool story like that too. But for me, growing up in Illinois in the late 80s, early 90s, you really didn't have a choice but to be a Michael Jordan fan. That was kind of the end all be all for sports in Central Illinois. But I also was a huge fan of Jackie Joyner-Kersee. I'm also from Illinois, and I think that fandom has grown just seeing what she's done post her Olympics and all of her other accolades, just everything she's done for the region and the city of St. Louis.
Great.
Well, let's see. I could not possibly get enough sports like growing up, and I played every sport you can imagine, with my two main sports being basketball and tennis. And it was interesting. I remember the day, it was probably the early 80s. My dad came into the house and he said, "Guess what, Christy? There is going to be a new channel on television that only plays sports." And that was, of course, ESPN. And I was just thrilled. I thought that was like the best idea in the world. And so, because, seeing any women athletes really before then, other than tennis, which I did play, it just wasn't that frequent. It was really, really hard to find. And, maybe the national championship game might be on, but so from a tennis standpoint, I love Gabriella Sabatini, Steffi Graf, Chris Evert, those tennis players. And then being from North Carolina, I followed men's ACC basketball. So when Coach K started out down the road, they got pretty good after 4 or 5 years, but that was Quinn Snyder, Johnny Dawkins, Mark Allery. And then at UNC, there was like Jordan and Sam Perkins and James Worthy. And so for me, it was really about the collective. And I didn't have one specific kind of fan or one specific kind of hero that I looked up to, but I was the same year as Julie Foudy. Kate, I don't know if we've talked about that, but of course she played soccer at Stanford and I played basketball. So Loudy Foudy, and what's her nickname? And not surprisingly. So so that those are kind of the athletes that I looked up to, but I would just watch anyone and anywhere I could.
That's great. And speaking of professional athletes, Christy and Kate, you are both very modest in your introduction. The listeners should know that Christy was a basketball player for the Seattle Reign, and Kate mentioned that she competed in the Olympics, but did not go on to say that she actually won a silver medal. So congratulations to you both. Very impressive careers. So I'll throw this to both of you. With that very impressive firsthand experience, how has that shaped your leadership roles in sports marketing?
I mean, I'll jump in because Hedge disappeared for a sec. So much in so many ways. I actually just sent a note. I watched over the weekend The Weight of Gold, which is Michael Phelps's documentary. It's been really weighing on me, just the end of the Olympics and this transition that so many of these athletes are now headed into. I really struggled with my Olympic transition because you go from the best in the world to having to reinvent yourself, and it's an identity crisis. I think and not to go down that rabbit hole, but what I was thinking about after watching this really powerful documentary that I'm so pleased Michael Phelps put out into the world was like, okay, what's on me as a marketer here? What can I do about this? And so I sent out, and across Google, all the way up to our CMO, an email about go see this documentary. Also go watch LSG, Megan Rapinoe and the U.S. women's soccer team's documentary. But like, what can we do about this to help solve this problem? And I think as a marketer, certainly you work for these big brands, but you get to really take on some meaty things in your role as a marketer as you think about the responsibility of these brands out in the world. Both at Visa and at Google, one of the responsibilities that we really take on and that I took on was, if you're going to put a message out in the world, what's the truth that you're going to speak? Are you just adding to the noise, or are you actually standing for something different? And so for me, knowing that I've been fortunate to work for two brands that have like their own role in the world that people look to and derive responsibility from, but that also like we have the power to actually really make a difference and to lead change if we're thoughtful about the message that we land. And so with that responsibility, I feel really lucky that I've been able to work on campaigns, everything from like the Sochi 2014 Olympics with Visa, where frankly we were having to address LGBTQ rights around what was going on in Russia, and we took a stand to make sure that like in our campaign we included a rainbow flag because Visa stands for everyone everywhere, all the way through to really what I'm incredibly proud of, which is the work that we're doing at Google right now and starting with the Wnba, which is to say, I mean, the world is behind the times to think now is the time to invest in sport. It's always been the time to invest in women's sports. But then it's actually bringing some of really what Google can uniquely do to that equation. And so for us, it's been looking at our media relationships. You know, we have long time storied relationships across various broadcasters and media conglomerates. And it was looking at, okay, well, you know, if we're going to enter into a partnership with the Wnba and we have deep relationships with ESPN, what can we do there to make this partnership somewhat different? You know, adding incremental games to drive visibility of the women's game on ESPN. But then also it's actually bringing our product to the mix too, to change paradigms. And that's a lot of what I see as really the fun part of my job, but also something that you have to check yourself on a little bit. Like, am I stuck in the paradigm of thinking certain things? So an example that I'll give you is around the French Open this year. You know, we ran in Sports Center just the facts that the most searched athletes in the world during the French Open were female, the top 3 most searched athletes. And I think sometimes like that seems such a simple thing to kind of that put out there into the world. But actually think about that for a minute. If you were to like poll 10 people and ask them, who do you think the top most searched athletes are? They'd probably probably list maybe one woman in the top 3. But, you know, so that's a lot of the responsibility and also the fun, I think, of using my sports background to look through a different lens and to challenge us to think differently about how we're showing up as a big brand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll take it a slightly like kind of different direction. I think for me, I've always believed that basketball, and I'm sure many other sports, almost, you know, map directly to business. And I thank goodness that I played sports, because for me, it was just so formative and, you know, I think shaping a lot of my my approach to business. And there's just so many of the principles in sports and basketball are really the same principles, you know, for what we do today, and why, you know, as I mentioned, we're in the middle of a whole business transformation around the Wnba, and, you know, from everything from, you know, having a game plan or having a strategy to, you know, preparing and doing all your homework, doing your market research. You know, I think the role that I play, understanding what is my role within kind of the team construct, and sort of being accountable as an individual to a team. Resilience. I mean, we've taken our knocks, you know, at different times, and we've just kept going because we're really focused on what we believe is the potential for our league. And, you know, just being a great teammate. I mean, whether it's, you know, working with Kate, working with our other partners, just really trying to understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and, you know, how we can see the bigger picture, as Kate talked about. How are we lifting all of women's sports through what we're doing? So, you know, all of those principles are things that, you know, I learned through sports and through basketball.
Absolutely. And to go ahead and shift that conversation over to sports marketing, the future of women's sports, I'm going to read a headline that was in the sports section of the Washington Post just a few months ago. It reads, "Women's sports can do at least one thing men's can't, experts say: get bigger." I'd love to get your reaction to this and what this means for sports marketing. Lisa, if you wouldn't mind jumping in.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the headline. I think it couldn't be more accurate, because it's definitely something that, you know, we at AB have been involved in, have been watching, and definitely plan to continue to be involved in and watching. And I think that you're starting to see so many companies come on board and start to dive into these opportunities. But like Kate said, it's kind of past time, right? Like it's been there. We've had to see the value in it, and people, I think, are starting to see kind of the growth opportunities. And I know for us, as we look at some of our partnerships through the Wnba, through the NWSL, and everything we've done there, as well as just some of our athlete partnerships that we've started to be able to bring on board. We're always looking for different ways to get more involved and really help elevate the game, as well as, you know, these women and everything that they're doing for, you know, their community, for the country, for everything they're doing across the board.
And to kind of piggyback off of that and take it a step further, in your opinion, and this is to all of you, what do you think it will take to get brands to be interested in women's sports and really drive those relationships? Because I think the research is there, right? Sports Innovation Lab came up with some really compelling research. I'd just be curious to get your point of view on, what will it take to really push that forward? And it's happening, but even more so in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective is, I think we need to, it's not just on brands. It's like, I mean, one of the things that we spent a lot of time addressing at Google was like understanding what the wheel looks like. It's a flywheel, and there's actually a number of different constituents on that flywheel that all play a very important role in terms of elevating women's sports. It starts with broadcasters, in my opinion, first and foremost. Like at some point, just like in Title IX, we've got to take the risk that like actually putting women's sports on TV will drive visibility. And then on top of that, or not even just TV, but in other platforms as well, where we can make sure there's a home for fans to go to. And then from there, brands taking the risk too, and the step early to invest before the numbers are always there. I think these days, everybody's always looking to want to see the numbers first and foremost. And the numbers are there. It's just, you've got to be willing to look through a different lens and understand that actually the stories that you can tell alongside women's sports are invariably going to be different from what you can tell alongside mainstream traditional, sporting models even. And so, again, my perspective is like, it takes, so at Google, looking at the relationships that we have, not just as a brand, but as an investor in media, as an investor in partners and technology, and saying, okay, what can we bring to bear that actually could do something different here so that we can tell a different story. We're not looking to tell the same story that we would tell in, broadcast for men's sports.
Yeah, I totally agree with that flywheel analogy, because people used to ask the NBA, well, what are you doing to make the WNBA successful? And the W has been supported and was birthed out of the NBA for many, many years. And I think it's about the whole system. It's media. We know that less than 5% of all sports coverage goes to women. It is the brands, but it's also, as Kate said, those in the media, and it's also fans showing up to buy a ticket, right, or to buy league pass. But I think as we when we look at what's going on in our league, at least that's obviously what I'm closest to, we can point to the scoreboard on a lot of measures from and say, hey, we're up, right? Like there is a really positive trend going, from viewership to our fans and followers to our over the top, our league pass product, to a merch. We were the number one item across all sports leagues for 6 weeks with the orange hoodie. And so I think really savvy brands like Kate and Google picking up on that early. And actually, we'll probably talk about this a little bit, I'm sure, is around, more women being in positions of decision making and being champions on the inside, like Kate, like Shiz Suzuki, who was at AT&T, and others, and Lisa at AB, and it's a combination of all of those things. But I think the brands that are really listening and are really savvy, they're picking up at least on what's happening with the WNBA. And for the first time in my 3 years here at the W, 7 years at total at the NBA, when I worked with the W some, we're starting to see a little bit of FOMO from some other partners and from prospects, and a real kind of sitting up and excitement and a taking, sort of a different interest in the W. And so to Kate's point, it's a lot about investing now, investing early. And I think we have some good numbers to show, but I think one of the things that's going to continue to hold women's sports back is the valuations from a media perspective. Still, in our view, are far too discounted, and they're measured in the same way that men's sports are measured. And so I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that I think we still have to sort of break down.
If there wasn't a heat advisory in St. Louis, I was going to wear my orange hoodie today, but thought it might be a little much. But I want to echo what Christy said. I think having, you need a Kate, right? You need someone in your organization to really bring it forward and say, hey, look, we're not going to look at this the exact same way as we do men's sports, but here's the opportunities and here's who we can reach and here's what we can do. And, from our perspective, it's looking at from a branding standpoint, what brand do we want to lead with? What's the right mix? What's the right fit? But there's so many really unique and cool stories that you can tell that are different and reach sometimes the same audience, but a lot of times a different audience than what you're doing on the other side.
Right, absolutely. Well, we could actually cite a real life example partnership. Through our conversation last week, I learned about a very exciting and groundbreaking partnership between the Wnba and Google. Christy and Kate, you guys have referenced it a few times on our call, but maybe you could share with the listeners, what is your Changemakers partnership, how it came to fruition, and how you see it impacting the sports marketing community.
I'll jump in, Hedge. Okay, so honestly, I mean, just pulling back the curtain a little bit, coming out of March Madness this year, I mean, it was like, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, that was my reaction. I just was like, this is just ridiculous that this is even a conversation right now in 2021. And, I could go down a rabbit hole in the NCAA. I'm not gonna do that right now. But it was, okay, so we're already kind of having these conversations and we've been talking to ESPN about, we actually, in May of 2020 had a brainstorm with ESPN about like, how do we change the game? What can we do? Laura Gentile's an old friend, like what can we do to change the game? These two powerful organizations that do a lot in sports, but like, what are we tangibly doing here? And then it was, March Madness happened. I'd already started having, Kathy and I had many conversations over the last year. And it just really was like almost obvious in some ways. Like WNBA season's about to start. It's the 25th anniversary of the WNBA. Like, shouldn't we be shouting this from the mountaintops? Oh, and by the way, they're heading into the Tokyo 2020 +1 Olympics where, Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi are going to become the most like gold medal winning women ever, period, in basketball. I mean, it's insane. And how are we talking about this? And what's the role that we're going to play? But we'd also at Google uncovered really what I call kind of like our red thread too, which is like, hey, how are we going to show up in the sports arena? And how can we be more helpful to fans? Because that's really what, I see as like my mission is with and through these sports and entertainment marketing partnerships, but really starting with sport, like how can we make sure that fans are getting more of what they want alongside the thing that we want? And when you look at women's sports, they're not getting enough of what they want just by virtue of the fact that like finding women's sports is so hard. Watching the game that you want to watch when you want to watch it is far more difficult than it should be. And so, having spent a year trying to meet every human possible at Google that does the jobs and just, drinking from the fire hose, it was kind of like almost using, I think, to my benefit, a little bit of the Noogler approach of what you don't, playing the newbie and asking the dumb questions of like, so why don't we connect these dots here? We spend this in media, we could be doing this with the WNBA and actually bringing them together. And so that in particular is what I'm really proud of, is that it really is a three-way partnership in what we're doing with the W, ourselves certainly as a change maker and really wanting to, and I cannot wait for the world to open up so that we can have the W at the Googleplex and like roll out all the bells and whistles of like, how do we actually really change the game together? But also like this three-way relationship with ESPN as well, and making sure that like we're having that three-way dialogue about together what it's going to take, because you're not going to solve it one-on-one. Like we have to play 3-on-3.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And I'll just add on kind of a couple layers. One is just what Changemakers of the platform is, because it's something that that we saw there was a potential fit, when we created Changemakers, that we kind of refer to it as a collective of these, value-driven companies. We've got, we originally started with AT&T, Nike, and Deloitte, and then Google came on, as Kate said, but that are willing to partner with us to sort of harness their own power to do a couple of things, of course, achieve their business objectives, but as a change maker to elevate women's sports. So I can touch on that, but also to make progress against injustices. So the lifting of women's sports, the things that Kate mentioned, and then just to kind of put a fine point on it, even to help us deliver the value that we want to our players. So in paying them more, through our CBA, which we signed in 2020, being able to pay them more, being able to give them better experiences in travel and hotels, being able to give them better benefits around childcare and family planning, is that these change makers like Google are helping to make that happen. And oh, by the way, on top of that, all of the work that we've been doing and really our players have been leading in social justice, having change makers support us helps us continue to really lead in that area. And I'm so proud that the WNBA, a women's league, I would say, and Kate Javari obviously was just on talking about the NBA and all that they've done in social justice. That's obviously our brother. But I think many people would say, that WNBA has been in the headlines with the NBA, if not really at the forefront. And so we're really proud of that. And the change makers are making that possible. I think Kate talked about fans. We all in women's sports, we need to bring in more fans. And so a really important role that Google is playing is really around fan insights. And because I truly believe that, and if you can't find the games and the media isn't writing about it as much as you'd like for them to, it's really hard to bring in new fans. And so much of that just happens systemically. On the men's side, it just sort of becomes ingrained in sports fans. About the teams, about the players, about the rivalries. And so it's harder to attract new fans in the system that we're in. And so with a partner like Google, if they're bringing the power that they have around fan insights to help us on a range of business objectives related to fans, and then it just makes so much sense. And again, it's so much bigger than just a marketing partnership, because it's really doing something important.
Right. I will just pause real quick. We have a little bit less than 15 minutes. So if anybody wants to, start putting their questions, we can have a little Q&A session at the end. But I'm going to keep it moving. So each of you hold important sports leadership roles at your respective companies, really in what have been historically male-dominated industries, from alcohol to professional sports, technology. Can you guys speak to your personal journeys, the ways you've achieved success and kind of push through that barrier?
Happy to jump in here. I think for me, I've worked in two largely male-dominated industries with both the team side and the alcohol side. But I came to terms with the end of my athletic career a lot sooner than the other ladies on the panel. Mine was closer to 16, 17 probably. But I do think that even from my playing days growing up, I played all the sports growing up, and just what you learn on a team. And I know Christy touched on this too, but the team mentality and everything I learned from that team atmosphere, I think has helped me transition over into the business world and just learning how to work with all different people, whether it be male, female, different backgrounds, et cetera. And when I started at the Rams, I was new coming in. There were very few high-ranking females in the NFL at the time. And we had one at the Rams, Molly Higgins. She's still with the LA Rams, but she was a VP at the time. And she had a sign on her door. I remember seeing where it was, if once a door is open for you, it's your responsibility to bring two more with you. And I think through that, just seeing the growth of women over the years in the sports industry, I've kind of taken that upon myself as well to help with either mentoring or hiring or whatever that might be, to help change a culture. Because, there's definitely a culture shock when you start on a professional team or anything on those lines. But I've been lucky through the relationships I've made and the mentors that I've had to really be able to navigate the waters through that.
Oh, no, Christy's still there. Christy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I was just thinking a little bit about how my experience in a lot of rooms where I was the only woman. I mean, the most that I ever counted was 25 men and me. So it was pretty stark. And I'm sure it didn't occur to them, but for me, it was just, I would often be in a room of all men, but maybe if it was only 5 or 6 guys, I wouldn't really notice as much. But this was like 25 guys. And I just thought, wow, this was in the sports apparel and footwear industry, but it was a regular occurrence. And I think, what's been helpful for me to sort of hopefully, build on that experience and grow in my career and move on to other things, was to build one-on-one relationships with the guys that I worked with. So getting to know them first, as individuals. And then, of course, I think, if there was a big meeting, then I knew that I might align with, a couple of those guys. And then you go into a room and you don't feel as you just feel more prepared, I think, to have a friendlier room where you can feel comfortable. You of course need to do your homework and prepare and all of those things and have a point of view. But I found that as I built my relationships with the guys individually, that when we were together as a group, making decisions, debating things, brainstorming, that I was more comfortable speaking up and being assertive. And because I know so many women, it can be intimidating, but I think what that did was it just built confidence for me younger, earlier in my career. And I don't think that sports hurt that either. Like most women who play sports, you end up playing against guys a lot. So, I definitely love to see that things are changing. There's a really palpable shift. And, as Lisa talked about, the ranks being a little bit more balanced, which is great to see. But I think if you're going to be in this industry, you're still going to find yourself a lot of times with not a whole lot of women. And I think it's just important to figure out how you can thrive. So those were a few things that really helped me and seem to work well.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that. I think I was very fortunate in that when I started off in my sporting career, post Olympics, I started in Olympic consulting. So in a lot of ways, like I actually used my experience as an Olympian to be like, I know more about the Olympics from the inside than anybody else in this room. And so it gave me certainly a different confidence in a lot of those rooms where I really was the only woman in the room. But there was a very pivotal moment in my career at Visa, frankly. I'd come in to kind of lead the Olympic vertical, and I kept thinking to myself, I got to get out of the Olympic vertical. Like, I love the Olympics, but I'm so much more than the Olympics. I want my career to be about more than the Olympics. And we were hiring for my future boss. And, I kind of saw these guys come in and out of the interview process. I interviewed a few of them, and I went away for a weekend and had this thought, like, these guys that we were interviewing have been my peers in some respects. Like, some of them were more senior, but a number of them were peers. And I was like, what am I doing sitting on the sidelines of this? And at the same time, I'd read this quote about how, men are like 90% likely to go for a job they're 50% qualified for, whereas women are 50% more likely to go for a job they're 90% qualified for. And I'm like, I am qualified to do this job. I could do this. So I called my boss on the Monday and I said, I'm putting my hat in the ring. I want to be part of the interview process. And to his credit, he was like, I think you'd be fantastic at this. I'm glad to hear you're throwing your hat in the ring. And I hadn't thought of you, immediately, like off the top, but like, I'm glad. So, but it's a good comment to, like, no one's going to advocate for you if you don't advocate for yourself. Right. And so I think doing that, really the rest is history, because I think I really learned something powerful in that conversation of like throwing my hat into something that I was a little bit nervous about, but ended up getting. And I would just encourage anybody, if you think for a second that that's something that you might want to go for, just go for it. The worst thing that could happen is that you learn something about yourself along the way.
Right. No, I love that story. I think it really speaks to the fact that the qualification is there. It's just that, confidence to go get it. But now that you have all found yourselves in leadership positions at your company, this has been touched upon a few times. You are bringing a new lens, new conversation points, and these are elements that are just really helping companies grow and connect with fans, connect with their consumers in ways that they haven't before. So I applaud all of you for those efforts. I'm going to go ahead and look over at the Q&A real quick. So one question that came in was, I'd love to hear about the role of live stream in your space, as it's something that is here to stay. So maybe how that's impacted, sports marketing, partnerships, obviously that space is really growing. So anywhere you guys might want to take that question.
I mean, I can take just a quick stab. I mean, for us, I may have mentioned our over the top, our streaming product is called League Pass, and there's also an NBA League Pass. We have seen close to 50% increase in subscriptions and revenue this year. And, what it does is it gives, it gives access, obviously, for fans, no matter where you live, to watch our games. And it also creates, it really helps create, a relationship more so with our fans. It helps us build our database. And I mentioned before, we're really looking to expand, our fan base. And so, we certainly have plenty of, partners, broadcast partners, obviously ESPN. We have CBS, we have Amazon, we have NBA TV. And so some of the games are blacked out, but we really have found a lot of success as our brand has grown. Demand for kind of the over-the-top product has grown as well, and that's something that we're going to continue to focus on and build out our capabilities a little bit more and invest more in that area. As we go forward, but it's been something that has seen a lot of growth as a lot of our other metrics, but it allows us to be closer to our fans and understand more about our fans.
Right. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we're going to continue to need both, but I do think live stream for women's sports in particular is going to be, I think it's an incredible opportunity because, it plays to existing fan bases who want more and want to be able to find what they want to watch when they want to watch it. There is opportunistic opportunity within live stream too, but I think we're going to need both in that respect, where you have live sport on TV to capture, new audiences, other audiences, but then you can hopefully direct live stream. But I do believe that actually that is frankly the future of women's sports. We just launched a partnership with UEFA Women's between YouTube and DAZN in Europe, and I'm very excited to kind of see how that plays out and what we can learn from that, and then start to apply to other women's sports around the world.
Awesome. Thank you. David's appearing, so I believe that's our cue that our session's over.
It is. I didn't want to hit the gong before if you have any closing thoughts, but no, this was really wonderful. It was inspiring just hearing about kind of your personal journeys and the lessons that you've learned that you've now shared with our community. So thank you. And of course, I think, I'm not sure if any of you saw, we had our last sports marketing upfronts was soccer focused. We had Lisa Baird, the commissioner of the National Women's Soccer League, who was echoing some of the things that you guys are talking about. Really, the world is ready for the networks and the brands to support women's professional sports at the next level. And I really hope that we see that happen in the near future. And to your point just now, if anything, the way that people have embraced, tuning in virtually and that the brands and the leagues have embraced live streaming will only hopefully expedite that. So again, thank you, Christy, thank you, Kate, thank you, Lisa, thank you, Lauren, for sharing with us and joining us today. And I hope we can have you all back again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to keep the show rolling. We do have one last session.